I think that there will be a lot of sadness, frustration and disappointment in hundreds of thousands of Irish homes tonight as older people, people in retirement on retirement pensions from social protection, as people who are carers, as people who, who have a disability and who rely on a social protection income. When they look down the lists of what's in this budget for them, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. A pensioner couple will get nothing. I welcome the increase in the living alone allowance, but what about pensioner couples? Do they not have an entitlement to some consideration by this government? Now, we know from the ESRI that without a Brexit, inflation next year in Ireland will be about 1.5%. But the ESRI has said that if there is a difficult Brexit, inflation could rise by food prices in particular, and particular cheaper food prices, a lot of which, for those of you who do the weekly supermarket shop will know, quite a lot of them are imported from England. So if there's a hard Brexit, it's, you don't have to be an economist to forecast that those kind of prices will rise. And who will they hit? They'll hit the people on the lowest incomes, the people who are either on very low pay or who are relying on social welfare or who are retired and are shopping around for bargains. And the estimate by the ESRI in the event of a no-deal Brexit was between 892 and 1,360 per household in the case of a no-deal Brexit. Now, over and over again, the Minister said this budget was based on a no-deal Brexit, and you've decided to leave the poorest people, the most vulnerable people in the country, out of the Brexit consideration. Can any of the people who are here explain that? It's an unbelievable error of judgment to say that people whom the ESRI have told us are the most likely to suffer from a difficult Brexit are the people, and I have these two pages here. It's page 90 and 91. You have it there yourselves, you can check it. The state pension, $248.30 this year, $248.30 next year. Widows, $208 this year, $208 next year. The people who are on unemployment assistance or benefit, $203 this year, $203 next year. Now, you have given a couple of concessions. The living alone allowance, which we welcome, has gone up from €9 to €14. That's the first increase since I increased it as Minister some years ago. You have given children over 12 whose parents are unemployed and on social welfare €3 a week extra. You've given children under 12 whose parents are unemployed and on social welfare €2 a week. Nothing for all those families in work who rely quite heavily on child benefit. Absolutely nothing for them. We know there is some allocation, but there's such a mess in relation to the allocation, in relation to the childcare subsidies, in respect of children broadly under 4. So what about children over 4? They eat. They're going to want, to be reflected in the household budget in the event of a difficult Brexit. There's nothing there for them at all. I welcome the increases in the child dependent allowance, but is the government lacking in complete sensitivity to families on low incomes or on social welfare incomes or on retirement state pension incomes who are literally going to get nothing really from this budget? And in fact, if you look at their costs, some of them obviously will be impacted by the carbon tax. The second thing I want to say to you at the beginning, And I think this is a particular disgrace in the context of the scenario that the ESRI have set out in terms of the impact of a no-Brexit deal. And that is, there was not one word out of the Minister's mouth about an increase in the minimum wage. Now, when I was Taoiseach, I oversaw the introduction of legislation and arrangements, the Low Pay Commission, to try again and get to those people in work, working their backs off in a lot of cases, who are on the minimum wage. This year we were meant, or next year I should say, on the 1st of January, we were meant to pass, if you like, the magic threshold of €10 an hour. And there is nothing from the Minister today about it. So I'm assuming that the increase in the minimum wage of around, I think it was around 30 cents, is parked pending Brexit. So all those low-paid workers, they're going to get nothing either, even though, again, they're the people who are likely to be most affected by price rises in the event of a very difficult Brexit. We agree with the budget referencing the difficulties of Brexit. We agree with that. We've been supportive of the government for the last 3 years since we left the government in relation to getting the best possible Brexit deal for Ireland. But I must say, I wonder what happened to Minister Doherty around the cabinet table. Was she sandbagged, or what happened to her that she emerged with such a dreadful outcome? I mean, I know how hard it is to fight as a minister for your share of the funding, but she seems to have literally sold the pass. And the people who are most likely to be affected are actually left out. And the annual budget is a bit like an NCT test on a government, an opportunity to look carefully under the bonnet, check the brakes, inspect the engine, and even give the tyres a few hard kicks to check if they are roadworthy. So one of the vital tasks of all deputies from both sides is to sit ministers down, tell them to breathe deeply and have a proper no-holds-barred examination of their stewardship. One duty that falls on us here is to use the budget debate to put the public finances under an intense and fierce scrutiny. We need also to expose the government's often shifting and contradictory outlooks on the key issues of Brexit, climate change and the nation's economic state at a time of great international turbulence. These are questions that need to be asked and asked again and again until ministers run out of excuses, fantasies about tax cuts and places to hide. Our task here is to nail persistent evasions, to punctuate the make-believe narratives and to unpick the deceptions that are at the heart of the government story. The French novelist Voltaire wrote a short novel called Candide, whose famous character is a teacher called Pangloss, who sees everything with unlimited optimism, that all is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. Both the Taoiseach and his finance minister constantly exhibit the telltale signs of the Pangloss mentality. I sometimes wonder if there is a rivalry between them as to which of them can outdo the other in persuading the public that all is for the best under their benign leadership. We all know that this is far from true, except to Fine Gael's true believers. And the social welfare payments and I don't know what happened. They went AWOL in relation to that issue. They didn't cop that it had a Brexit effect. You know, it's amazing. So we're supposed to have, for instance, a summer economic statement giving an honest basis for the Budget Oversight Committee to do its work. In practice, it's become like a light piece of summer fiction. Last year, the summer statement was woefully dishonest and bore no relation to the subsequent budget or to the final end-of-year outturn. This year hasn't really been much difference. And again, we face the probability of extensive supplementary budgets in many key departments, with health, as usual, at the top of the queue, with the voracious appetite for eye-watering additional funds to cover up the Minister's hapless inability to manage his budget year after year. Let us recall one startling fact about the public finances for 2018. There was the usual forecast of spending, then there was the actual outcome at the end of the year of around 77 billion. The gap between the two was eye-watering, and if you recall, I think I said here that the Minister found the billion that was missing or so down the back of the sofa, but he produced it anyway on budget day. Minister Donoghue got it wrong by multiple billions. No wonder the Fiscal Council has shredded both his reputation and his record, and indeed this government's reputation. Few ministers have ever been taken to task as robustly as this minister was in the Council's last report in the early summer. Not credible was the judgment set out in 170 pages. Not credible then and not credible now. A private sector CEO would be out on his ear for such a dismal result. The minister has been saved time and again by the massive income coming in from corporation taxes. We're raking it in, if you recall, was the Taoiseach's vain boast at Davos in January when he was up in the clouds. So maybe so, but to what useful purpose? In reality, that flow of cash has been a mixed blessing if its sole purpose is to rescue errant ministers from the consequences of their financial incompetence and management. This year was supposed to be different. Health got a generous estimate with the express purpose of putting an end to the annual farce of late-year adjustments. But not a bit of it. Mr Harris is back again for another windfall, around the 400 million mark at the moment, I think, and counting by the time we get to the end of the year. He doesn't even have the gall to apologise. Let us say the overruns add up to the 400 million. I think it may well be more in the end. Has that cash delivered any genuine improvements in health outcomes? Not in waiting lists, not in trolley numbers, not in a whole list of defects that plague our healthcare, not in the achievement of any significant advance in delivering sláinte care. That 400 million should be available to deliver the kind of genuine game changers that healthcare in Ireland needs. We have 3 maternity hospitals in Dublin: Holles Street, the Rotunda and the Coombe. Each has a well-established and long-agreed capital plans for development at a time when the number of births is increasing rapidly. The Rotunda wishes to transfer to Connolly Hospital in Blanchardstown. There's to be a new National Maternity Hospital at St Vincent's to replace Holles Street, and the Coombe is due to be rebuilt as well. Then there are the many capital needs of existing general hospitals all over the country for extra beds, additional theatres, improved MRI and other diagnostic facilities. If the additional funds were needed to accelerate these projects, then there would be no problem in approving the extra spend. But that's not the case. We will be asked in December to wave through supplementary estimates for no other reason than ministerial failure to deliver results within budgets that already had been increased. Quite simply, Fine Gael are not to be trusted with precious public funds. Unsafe and unsatisfactory is the proper verdict on their financial stewardship. To be honest, incompetence is the hallmark of quite a number of the people who sit over there. You cannot make a judgment on a policy by simply saying that so many billions are to be spent in delivering it. The public will judge by results, not by grandiose plans and promised billions. And so far, results have been few and far between. I think that this government has been far too slow in recognising the effects of an almost certain economic slowdown, both in the USA, in China and in Europe. the erratic behaviour of the current US administration, and the very obvious evidence of a serious slowdown in the UK will compound the impact of Brexit, even if a deal is reached in the coming weeks. I find precious little evidence that serious attention is being paid to worrying international trends. The ECB is well alert to those trends and is adjusting its bond buying and interest rates to meet those challenges. Many of the big international companies operating here, they will weather any storms. But our own domestic firms will find the going hard should markets contract through a tit-for-tat trade war. I just have very little confidence that ministers who fail so badly in managing finances in good times can be trusted when chill winds blow in from outside, even if Brexit ends up with a benign outcome. Not even Dr. Pangloss could manage to get good news from that. This was to be the climate change budget. I rather doubt that the tepid measures announced today will push Ireland much further up the league of international defaulters, laggard before and laggard still. In any overall strategy on climate change, the transport sector has to be front and centre. If there's to be any genuine reduction in Ireland's collective carbon footprint, it will be primarily evident in the way we make the switch, in the way we transport people and goods. I see some unpussed vehicles on the street, proudly boasting that they are zero-emission vehicles. It's a welcome sight, and I hope to see more of the same in all the vehicles used by public utility companies and public services. Could we have regular audits of how public organisations, such as the OPW, are moving to replace their fleets? It's then we'll truly know just how committed the state is to climate change goals. And one other thing, apart from the climate issue, there are solid public health grounds to secure cleaner air in our cities and towns by replacing polluting vehicles and polluting fuels. We now know from the excellent research done by the Environmental Protection Agency that there are numerous illnesses, many life-threatening, that flow from the polluted air we tolerate far too easily in this country. Many citizens die prematurely from asthma-related illnesses, and thousands of others endure distressing and painful conditions that come entirely from the failure of the state to insist on clean air as a human right. The Taoiseach and his ministers delight in making grandiose announcements of new investments to expand public transport, but their record on delivery falls far short of their lofty ambitions. Let me highlight a few of these. Any day, morning and evening, the peak time buses and trains that serve my constituency are packed to capacity. Such is the length of the journey and the crowding. The joke is that Dublin Bus or Transport Ireland are going to install toilets and maybe a coffee dock on a bus because people's journey for what should be about 20 to 30 minutes is about an hour and a half to get to the outer areas of my constituency. And the buses are just jam-packed. A man this morning on the bus told me that 10 buses had passed him by before he actually was able to get on a bus. The same is true in relation to our trains. They're packed to capacity. And so if you come on at a later station, you really have to we need those Japanese pushers to push people into the trains. The time scale for the delivery of the extra rail carriages that we require runs to years. The absolute imperative has to be the electrification of the principal commuter lines, such as Connolly to Maynooth service, as well as those to Clare and Drogheda. I think we should set a timetable where we have an electric train to Portlaoise, onto Cork, onto Galway, onto Sligo. We've no ambition for the kind of transport that other countries take for granted. I'm not at all convinced that the Minister for Transport is in any way sufficiently engaged in delivering rail electrification on the scale that is urgently required. Nor am I convinced that the National Transport Authority is sufficiently equipped to advance the project while also managing bus connects and the metro. I simply do not believe the current arrangements are adequate to secure a timely delivery of this group of transport projects. There are already significant delays in almost every single element of the plans that have been announced over and over again. Public resistance to particular components of each separate project, notably bus connects, has already undermined public confidence in the way a much wanted project is proceeding. I've mentioned here a number of Dublin-based initiatives which are undoubtedly costly and often disruptive, but other parts of Ireland have identical and justifiable needs. Cork, Galway and Limerick all need their own public transport projects as responses to the current congestion that is both economically damaging and unsightly to all. What I want to see from this budget debate is some clear evidence of serious commitment from all parties to a sustained multi-annual investment in top-class public transport that will also be a considerable contributor to low carbon and healthier cities and towns because the air will be cleaner. I hear words, targets and promises from ministers, but fear that they lack credibility. It's not the dizzy amounts of capital that jump out from ministerial statements and umpteen launches that count. It's their proven inability to make delivery on time and within budget that marks them out as failures. Another critical element is the retrofitting of homes. Many citizens are actively working to use personal savings and public grants to cut their own carbon footprints and conserve energy. Their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren are telling people and advising them how to do it. This is a moment when people actually want to do it. There are hundreds of thousands of homes that were built decades ago that require substantial renovation to upgrade their energy ratings. This is truly a gigantic task to do in a decade. One serious deficiency is the shortage of skilled labour for the particular task of conservation, as distinct from routine construction for homes and offices. I do want the Minister for Skills to come forward with a training programme to attract apprentices into this area. We do not have enough qualified personnel or dedicated contractors available to concentrate on this job of retrofitting homes to a very high standard. There's a compelling need to offer low-cost financial packages to homeowners who recognise the value of work that will deliver real savings to offset the cost of the work, not to mention the additional comfort that this work can bring to their homes. I just want to make this point about carbon tax. Last June, the CSO published an interesting study on environmental taxes. The report revealed that such taxes contribute as much as $5 billion a year to the exchequer under various headings. They also estimated that Ireland paid a total of $4.1 billion in potentially environmentally damaging subsidies in 2016. So we're collecting $5 billion at the moment in environmental taxes, and we're then giving over $4 billion back in subsidies, some of which are causing pollution. Like that kind of lack of joined-up thinking just has to end. Each budget should contain a number of specific clawbacks of these subsidies by reducing both the tax reliefs and the direct subsidies. They just emasculate the effectiveness of environmental taxes because they actually encourage activities that can add to carbon footprint in our economy. It's unfortunate that the climate change debate is obscured by one type of carbon taxes. The state's response has to involve a much wider suite of measures about electricity, about home improvements, and above all by a commitment to public transport on a scale never seen before. Now, I just want to mention demography because demographics has been the other key word in the budget beside Brexit. On my first day in the Department of Social Protection, I got the usual briefing that all new ministers get. I had really thought I was going to get a lecture about the pressures that I was going to face as a consequence of the economic crash and the Troika. What I did not expect was the blunt assessment of annual costs that would arise from an ageing population. People are living longer, an undoubted and welcome triumph of medical advances, but I was told I was going to need an extra 200 million a year, come what may, to pay the state pension, even if there were to be no increase in rates. This is no less true today than it was then, and there's a further dimension now. The number of children is growing very fast, and lots of European countries look on amazed and even envious at Ireland's population growth in a way that is rather unique. Current CSO figures indicate a remarkable youth share of Ireland's overall population, over 20% in the 0 to age 14 group. I mean, they're really astonishing figures. In the long term, that's a fantastic bonus. But right now, it brings its own substantial costs in healthcare, in safe maternity facilities, in parental leave entitlements, in education at all levels, from early childhood to third level. My concern is that the emphasis is on current costs and not enough attention is paid in the capital budget to meet these needs. We all know how the government has bungled the National Children's Hospital, with serious and unacknowledged consequences for every other aspect of the capital programme. Our maternity hospitals are in dire need of investment, as I outlined earlier. Schools need to be built on time when there's a population bulge. Early childhood education has paramount relevance, both as a key component of childcare and as a proven catalyst for later education achievement. At the other end of the age cycle, there are ever-increasing care needs for senior citizens. And one thing that is shocking, and I don't know if the Minister who's left here now would know, but whatever happened to the agreement to have a supplementary savings pension to allow people to retire in more comfort when they come to retirement age? We haven't heard a word of that, just vanished. There was lots of chat by Leo about it, and then it simply vanished. So many people at work now are denied a clear path to home ownership, and I think that this is one of the most disappointing things about this government. Fine Gael is going out of its way to end the fact that in Ireland people legitimately aspire to actually own a home, and so we have a home-owning democracy. But Fine Gael is determined to change that and actually to put, if you like, everything to do with housing as far as possible into the hands of landlords. This is going to have major impacts on how we live and what happens to people in retirement as well. Leo and his mates are content that people in their own age group should be content to rent all through their working lives. You don't need a crystal ball to predict what this means decades from now when that group comes to retirement age. They will need to go on paying rent from their retirement income, while those who manage to own their homes will have paid off mortgages and will not have this pressure on their monthly income in retirement. And I do think this is one reason alone that Fine Gael needs to sit down and think about what it's doing in housing and the imbalances it's causing, never mind the distress and the damage being done to children and adults who are in long, long periods of homelessness. I want to just make a brief comment on the cultural institutions. We had a visit here recently in this house from writers who wanted to talk about putting books into school libraries, so every child is really encouraged to read books. So we had really world-famous authors like Anne Enright and Paul Murray here, and it was a very modest proposal, but I think it's something that the government should seriously consider, that every school should have a library and should have a modest fund to actually buy books that children can read. Similarly, every child should have an experience of a cultural event at least once a year. I just want to end on the note that Leo, particularly when Boris has been around, has been happy to display his education in the classics. So he did that when Prime Minister Johnson was here a few weeks ago. Given that kind of a classical education, I'm sure he's well aware of the dangers of hubris. So I want to say to this government now, when hubris comes, can nemesis be far behind? That's a friendly warning to this Fine Gael government, and I hope they can consider it. Thank you.